The road ahead stretched out endlessly, bathed in the orange hues of the setting sun. I was alone, my mind drifting between thoughts as music played softly in the background. There's a certain serenity to driving at dusk, until it's shattered by something you don't expect. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, a small figure framed by the fading light. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me, a shadow or a trick of the light. But as I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. No! It wasn't my imagination. It was a child. My heart skipped a beat, a jarring thud echoing in my chest. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness of the road. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at something or nothing beyond the horizon. I instinctively hit the brakes, my car coming to a halt with a screech that echoed in the quiet. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield. Her silhouette was clearer now. Her hair was tangled, her clothes dirt-streaked. She looked so out of place, so fragile against the backdrop of asphalt and wilderness. What the hell? I muttered to myself, shaking off the shock. Something about the stillness, the way she just stood there, rooted me to the spot. I gripped the steering wheel, debating what to do. My logical side screamed to stay in the car. Who knows what kind of situation this could be? But my heart couldn't leave her there. And so, there I was, in the middle of an empty road, staring at a child who didn't belong there. A moment that should have been ordinary became anything but. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Every instinct screamed for me to act, yet fear anchored me to the seat. What if this was some kind of trap? What if stopping put both of us in danger? But then I looked at her again, really looked. She wasn't moving. She hadn't so much as glanced in my direction, even though the sound of my car skidding should have startled her. Her small figure seemed even more fragile now, the dusk wrapping around her like a shadow. I couldn't just leave her there. I slammed the car into park, took a breath to steel my nerves, and opened the door. The air was cooler than I expected, biting against my skin as I stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I approached, the sound feeling impossibly loud in the stillness. "Hey!" I called, my voice uncertain. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I took a few more hesitant steps forward. "Are you okay? What are you doing out here?" Nothing. No reaction. She just kept staring straight ahead, her eyes locked on some unseen point in the distance. By the time I reached her, my heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I crouched down, trying to meet her at eye level. Up close, she looked even younger, her pale face streaked with dirt. There was something haunting about her expression. Lost, but not quite afraid. "What's your name?" I tried again, my tone as gentle as I could make it. "Do you need help? Are your parents nearby?" Finally, she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something, relief maybe, or recognition. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the blank, distant stare behind. That was it. The moment I knew I couldn't walk away. "All right," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "We'll figure this out." I glanced back toward my car, debating whether to take her there or stay put and call for help. But the thought of leaving her alone, even for a second, made my stomach churn. "Come on," I said, holding out my hand. She hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and the road, but after a long pause, she reached out. Her tiny fingers barely wrapped around mine, but that simple touch felt monumental, like I'd crossed an invisible line. Leading her toward the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of us. As I helped her into the passenger seat, I noticed how stiff her movements were, as if she weren't entirely present. She sat there, silent, her feet dangling above the floor mat. I crouched beside the open door, studying her more closely now. Her face told a story, though I couldn't yet understand it. Dirt smudged her cheeks, and her hair was matted in places, as if she'd been wandering for days. But what struck me most were her eyes. They were wide, glassy, and hollow, like she was staring at something only she could see. I swallowed hard. "Do you know where your parents are?" I asked softly, trying not to overwhelm her. She didn't respond, her head tilted slightly, her gaze drifting to the dashboard, then back out toward the road. It was as though I weren't even there. I tried again. "Are you hurt? Can you tell me what happened?" Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment I thought she might speak. But all that came out was a faint, almost inaudible sound, a sigh, or maybe just a breath. Something inside me twisted. There was a vulnerability about her, a fragility that made my chest ache. She looked so small, so out of place in the world of adults and asphalt. I leaned back on my heels, running a hand through my hair as I tried to piece together what to do next. If I called the police, would she trust them? Would they even know how to help? "Okay," I said aloud, more for my own benefit than hers. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." I grabbed a bottle of water from the back seat and twisted off the cap, offering it to her. She stared at it for a long moment before reaching out with trembling hands. She took a small sip, then another, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hesitation made me wonder how long it had been since someone had shown her kindness, or even noticed she existed. "Do you have a name?" I asked again, keeping my tone light. This time, she glanced at me briefly, her lips pressing together in a way that almost resembled a frown. I caught a glimpse of something, maybe fear, maybe frustration, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I sat there for what felt like forever, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was as if the world had left her behind, and she didn't know how to come back. I didn't know how to bring her back, either. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't leave her alone in that state. "How does this part feel to you? Let me know if any changes are needed before I proceed to the next one." Você diz. Prósiga o ChatGPT diz. Continuing with the next part, calling for help back in the driver's seat, I couldn't keep my hands still. They drummed against the steering wheel, fumbled with my phone, and ran nervously through my hair. I glanced over at her again, hoping for some sudden sign of clarity, but she just stared out the window, the same vacant look on her face. This wasn't something I could handle alone. I needed help. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I scrolled to the emergency services number, my thumb hovering over the call button. It seemed like the obvious thing to do. The police or social services would know what to do, wouldn't they? But as I looked at her again, something stopped me. She didn't seem scared of me, but I wasn't sure how she'd react to strangers in uniforms asking questions she might not be able to answer. "Do you want me to call someone? The police? Your parents?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Her small shoulders tensed and her head turned just slightly, though her gaze didn't meet mine. That was enough of an answer. I let out a frustrated sigh and opened the contacts on my phone. I needed a second opinion, someone who could help me think this through. My mind immediately went to Sarah, a close friend who'd worked briefly as a social worker. If anyone would know what to do, it was her. I hit the call button and waited. "Hey, it's late," Sarah answered after the third ring, her voice tinged with sleep. "What's going on?" My voice faltered as I glanced at the girl again. "I found a kid." "What do you mean you found a kid?" Her voice sharpened instantly. She was standing in the middle of the road. "She's alone. I don't think she's hurt, but she won't talk to me." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone was careful but firm. "You need to call the authorities. This could be serious." "I know," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. "But I don't know how to explain it. She's not responding to anything. I'm afraid if I scare her, she'll shut down completely." Another pause. "Okay," Sarah said finally. "For now, keep her calm. If she's not in immediate danger, don't push her too hard. but you need to report this. A missing child isn't something you can handle on your own. I know, I repeated, my voice softer this time. As I hung up, I glanced at the girl again. She was holding the empty water bottle now, turning it over in her hands like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. I opened my phone's browser and began searching for the local police department's non-emergency line. I figured I'd start there, ease into it at least. But just as I was about to dial, something caught my eye, a small glint of silver on her wrist. The glint of silver on her wrist pulled my attention like a magnet. I leaned closer, careful not to startle her, and saw it clearly for the first time, a small, delicate bracelet, tarnished and slightly loose around her tiny wrist. "May I see that?" I asked gently, pointing to the bracelet. For the first time since I'd found her, she hesitated, her fingers instinctively covering it. I waited, not wanting to force her, and after a moment, she relented, her hands slowly falling to her lap. The bracelet was simple, just a thin band of metal, but there was something engraved on it. I squinted in the dim light of the car's interior, tilting it to catch the faint lettering. A name, and below it a date. My stomach flipped. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had a second ago. A clue. "Is this your name?" I asked, pointing to the engraving. Her gaze followed my finger, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She didn't nod or speak, but the way her lips parted, the faint shift in her posture, it was enough to tell me I was on the right track. I said the name softly, testing it on my tongue. It felt strange, like speaking into a void, but her reaction was immediate. She blinked, her wide eyes locking onto mine. It was the first sign of life I'd seen from her since I'd stopped the car. "Okay," I said, my voice steadying. "That's a good start." I ran my finger over the engraved date. It was a little over a month ago. Was it her birthday? Something else significant? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. "Does this mean something to you?" I asked, gesturing to the date. Her lips moved ever so slightly, but no sound came out. Frustration and desperation twisted inside me. I didn't want to push her too hard, but the silence was maddening. I needed answers. Then it hit me. The bracelet might not just be a clue, it could be a lifeline. Someone must have made it for her. A parent, a guardian, someone who cared enough to engrave her name and a date. That someone might be out there right now, searching for her. "Okay," I said again, more to calm myself than her. "We're going to figure this out. I promise." Pulling out my phone, I opened a search engine and typed in the name and date, hoping for a miracle. Missing persons reports, news articles, anything that might lead me closer to the truth. It didn't take long to find something. A local news report from a few weeks ago. The name on the bracelet matched that of a missing child. My pulse quickened as I skimmed the article. The photo was unmistakable. The same wide eyes, the same tiny frame. I looked back at her, my throat tightening. This wasn't just a lost child. She'd been missing for weeks, and now, somehow, she was here, with me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a strange encounter on an empty road. This was a child who'd been missing for weeks. A child whose family might have given up hope, only for her to reappear in the middle of nowhere. I glanced at her again, sitting there quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Did she know how much she'd been missed? Could she even comprehend the whirlwind I was about to pull us into? My thoughts raced as I weighed my next move. I couldn't keep her in my car forever, but I also couldn't risk making a wrong call and losing her trust. For now, the only thing I could do was get us to safety and figure out the next step from there. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," I said, my voice firm but calm. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" She didn't respond, but something about the way she relaxed against the seat gave me a small spark of hope. As I started the car and pulled back onto the road, the weight of responsibility settled over me like a heavy cloak. My phone sat on the dashboard, the missing persons report still open on the screen. I stole glances at it as I drove, my mind piecing together fragments of the story. The article mentioned her disappearance, but offered little detail. She'd vanished from a park near her home, the last place anyone had seen her. No leads, no suspects, just a family left to search for answers that never came. Until now. The thought made my chest tighten. What had she been through in all that time? Where had she been? And why was she alone now? I tried to push the questions aside as I drove into the nearest town. The streets were quiet, most of the shops already closed for the night. The glow of a gas station caught my eye, and I pulled into the lot, parking under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I'll be right back," I told her, hesitating for a moment before stepping out. Inside, I grabbed a few essentials, more water, a snack she might eat, and a prepaid phone card, just in case. My mind was already spiraling into worst-case scenarios, but I forced myself to focus on the small tasks, one step at a time. When I returned, she was still sitting where I'd left her, the bracelet in her hands now. She was tracing the engraving with her finger, over and over, like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. "I got you something," I said, holding up the bag of snacks. Her eyes flicked toward me, cautious but curious. Slowly, she reached out and took the bag, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. That small act gave me the courage I needed to take the next step. Sitting back in the driver's seat, I dialed the number for the local police station. "Non-emergency line," I said quickly when the dispatcher answered. "I found a missing child, and I think I know who she is." The dispatcher's voice was calm but efficient, firing off questions faster than I could fully process them. "Where are you located? How old is the child? Is she injured or in immediate danger?" I answered as best as I could, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The dispatcher assured me an officer would be sent to my location immediately and asked me to wait where I was. When I hung up, I turned to the girl. She was still holding the bag of snacks, though she hadn't opened it. Her eyes darted toward me, uncertain but curious, like she could sense the shift in energy. "It's okay," I said, forcing a smile. "Help is on the way." She didn't respond, but she didn't seem scared either. That small reassurance kept me grounded as we waited under the harsh glow of the gas station lights. It wasn't long before the telltale flash of red and blue appeared in my rearview mirror. The cruiser pulled into the lot, and a uniformed officer stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face calm but serious as he approached the car. I got out to meet him, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. "She's in the passenger seat," I said softly. "She's not saying much, but I think she's the girl from this report." I handed him my phone, the article still open on the screen. The officer studied it for a moment before nodding. "We've been looking for her," he said, his voice heavy with something between relief and concern. "You did the right thing calling us." He stepped around me, crouching beside the open passenger door. "Hi there," he said gently, his tone so soft it caught me off guard. "My name's Officer Jenkins. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you." She didn't say anything, but her grip on the bracelet loosened slightly. Jenkins didn't push her. Instead, he asked me to step aside while he radioed for additional support. As I watched him, a mix of emotions churned inside me. Relief that she was finally in the hands of someone who could help, anxiety about what might come next, and a gnawing sense of dread about whatever had led her to that empty road in the first place. "Do you have any idea how she got here?" Jenkins asked when he returned. I shook my head. "She hasn't said a word. I couldn't leave her there." He nodded, his expression grim. "She's been missing for weeks. Her family's been searching nonstop. This is going to mean the world to them." The weight of his words sank in. Somewhere out there, her family was still waiting, still hoping. And now, because of a chance encounter, they might finally get the closure they so desperately needed. But there was still so much we didn't know. Where had she been? Who had taken her? Or had she wandered off on her own? And why had she been left alone in the middle of nowhere? As Jenkins gently guided her out of the car and into the back seat of his cruiser, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "Thank you," he said before closing the door. "You may have saved her life tonight." I nodded, watching as the cruiser pulled out of the lot and disappeared into the night. For a long moment, I stood there in silence, the enormity of it all settling over me like a fog. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not entirely. Not yet. The following day, I couldn't get her out of my mind. I kept replaying the moment I saw her standing on that road, the vacant look in her eyes, and the way she finally gripped my hand. It was as if some invisible thread still connected us, tugging at my thoughts no matter how hard I tried to focus on something else. I hadn't expected to hear anything more about her situation. After all, I was just a stranger who'd stopped to help. But when my phone rang that afternoon, the caller ID displaying an unknown number, I had a feeling it was about her. "This is Officer Jenkins," came the familiar voice on the other end. "I thought you want an update." I sat up straighter, my heart pounding. "Did you find her family?" "Yes," he said, and I could hear the relief in his tone. "We located them late last night. They were overwhelmed. Her parents, they've been through hell these past few weeks." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She was going home. "What happens now?" I asked. "They want to meet you," Jenkins said after a pause. "I told them about how you found her, and they insisted on thanking you in person. If you're comfortable with that, of course." I hesitated. Meeting her family felt so personal, so raw. But then I thought about the little girl, and how much that moment must mean to the people who loved her. "I'll come," I said. Later that evening, I found myself driving to a small community center where the reunion was to take place. My nerves buzzed with anticipation, unsure of what to expect. When I arrived, Jenkins met me at the door and led me inside. The room was warm and bright, filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. And then I saw them, a man and a woman sitting together, their hands clasped tightly, their faces a mix of exhaustion and hope. "She's with them now," Jenkins said softly. "Take your time." As I stepped closer, the little girl turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and something flickered their recognition. She reached out, her small hand finding mine again, just like she had on the road. The woman, her mother, stood and clasped her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "You found her," she whispered. "You brought her back to us." I barely had time to respond before she pulled me into a tight embrace. "Thank you," she said over and over again, her voice breaking. "You don't know what this means to us." Her father shook my hand, his grip firm but trembling. "We didn't know if we'd ever see her again. We owe you everything." I didn't know what to say. Words felt so small compared to the enormity of the moment. I simply nodded, feeling the weight of their gratitude and the deep love that filled the room. As I looked at the girl, now nestled safely between her parents, I realized just how much this moment mattered. Not just to them, but to me. Driving home that evening, the weight of everything that had happened began to settle in. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the darkened road stretched endlessly before me. Yet in my mind, I kept replaying the events of the last 24 hours. What if I hadn't stopped? The thought haunted me, weaving its way through every scenario I could imagine. If I'd driven past her, would someone else have found her? Would she still be wandering, lost and afraid, with no one to help her find her way? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than chance. Life had a way of nudging us in directions we couldn't always explain. That night, it had nudged me toward her, a small child standing in the middle of the road like a plea for help made flesh. The sheer fragility of it all hit me in waves. Every choice we make, every small decision, it's like a ripple in a pond, stretching far beyond what we can see. I'd stopped my car because of a split-second instinct, but that one choice had altered the course of her life and mine forever. As the miles passed, I found myself thinking about her parents. The look on her mother's face when she saw her daughter again, the tears that had fallen so freely, each one carrying the weight of weeks spent searching, fearing the worst, but never quite giving up hope. I thought about the girl, too, how quiet she'd been, how lost. And yet in her eyes, I'd seen something more, something unspoken, but undeniably there. A flicker of strength, maybe, or the faint beginnings of trust. She'd been through so much in her short life, and yet she was still here, still holding on. The road stretched on, but my thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Why me? Why had I been the one to find her? Out of all the people who could have crossed her path, why was I the one who stopped? I didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it didn't matter. What I did know was that this experience had changed something in me. It had reminded me of how fragile life can be, but also how resilient. How even in the darkest moments, there's a thread of connection that binds us all, strangers or not. By the time I reached home, the weight in my chest had begun to lift. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need them. What mattered was that she was safe, back where she belonged, and that somehow I'd been a small part of that. Fate, chance, or something else. I'd never look at the world quite the same way again. Let me know if this part resonates with you before I move on to the final chapter. A bond that will never break. Você diz. Prossiga o ChatGPT diz. Continuing with the final part, a bond that will never break. A bond that will never break. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night stayed with me, vivid and unshakable. I thought about her often, wondering how she was doing, whether she was adjusting back to life with her family, and if she'd started to find her voice again. Then one day, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. Hi, this is her mom. She'd like to see you. Would that be okay? A warmth spread through me, equal parts surprise and relief. Of course, I said yes. The following weekend, I found myself pulling into their driveway, a modest home with a garden in full bloom. Her parents greeted me at the door, their smiles warm but still tinged with the weight of everything they'd endured. She's in the living room, her mom said softly, leading me inside. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by coloring books and crayons. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up. Not with words, but with something even more powerful. Recognition. Hi there, I said gently, crouching to her level. She didn't say anything, but she reached for a drawing and held it out to me. It was simple, childlike, but unmistakable. Two figures standing on a road, hand in hand. One small, one taller. It's us, her mom explained, her voice catching. She's been drawing it ever since she came home. My chest tightened as I took the picture from her small hands. It wasn't perfect, messy lines and mismatched colors, but it felt like the most meaningful gift I'd ever received. We spent the afternoon together, and though she still didn't say much, her actions spoke volumes. She stayed close to me, showing me her drawings and occasionally slipping her hand into mine. Her parents shared more about what had happened, though much of it remained a mystery. They told me she was slowly healing, thanks to therapy and the stability of being back with people who loved her. You saved her, her dad said, his voice firm. And you've given us something we thought we'd lost forever. Hope. When it was time to leave, the girl surprised me. She stood by the door, clutching the same bracelet I'd noticed that first night. With a small, hesitant motion, she held it out to me. You want me to have this? I asked gently. She nodded. It was the first real answer she'd given me, and it nearly brought me to tears. I knelt down, accepting the bracelet with care. Thank you, I said softly. I'll keep it safe. As I drove away, the bracelet resting in my palm, I realized that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning of something quiet but enduring. We didn't see each other every day, but the connection remained. Her parents would send me updates, sometimes a picture or a note, letting me know how she was doing. And every so often I'd visit, just to check in, to remind her that someone else out there cared. She may have been a stranger on the road that night, but she was no stranger to me now. In a world where lives can cross and diverge in an instant, ours had become entwined in a way that would never unravel.